Anxiety is actually good, and when managed properly, can produce more productivity, more success. So why does everyone keep telling you to stop being anxious? Because oftentimes our anxiety gets to a place where it is wasting energy, that it is causing actual physical symptoms and causing your brain to feel confused. Anxiety is on a continuum. So you have mild anxiety all the way to severe or panic anxiety. Panic anxiety is when there's physical symptoms. People can actually feel like they're having a heart attack. Most people, when they're telling you to stop being anxious, they're talking about that moderate to severe anxiety that is impeding your function. But I want you to think of it as a continuum. And mild anxiety is actually productive, right? You think about you have a big project at work tomorrow and you have to present in front of the whole leadership team. Mild anxiety allows you to focus and prepare for that presentation. Moderate anxiety, maybe you're spending time focusing and preparing, but you are a little more anxious than you should be, and it impedes your sleep that night. And, you're kind of tired and a little disorganized at the actual presentation. That's moderate anxiety. Severe anxiety, you feel paralyzed, that you can't actually even prepare, and maybe it does not go over successfully. So that is the continuum of anxiety. Sometimes I have people come to me and they don't even know where their anxiety is coming from. They're like, I don't know what I'm anxious about. I'm just always anxious. And when someone tells them to stop being anxious, what do you think happens? Their anxiety actually increases, right? So many people that, teach on anxiety talk about stopping anxiety. And I want to challenge that concept of, I don't want you to stop your anxiety. I want you to, one, figure out where it's coming from. And then I want you to decrease it. So going back to that continuum, if you are on a 6 or 7, if you were to rate that anxiety, I want you to bring it down to a 4 or 5. That seems a lot more doable, manageable than to say, stop being anxious. As you can see in my thought map, that just the other day, this was a recent thought map where I was kind of anxious. I knew it was based on a decision that I needed to make at work and kind of the pressure on the time on that, but I didn't know why it was causing me so much anxiety. And so I stopped and I did a thought map on that. And this is what I teach with the Mentally Strong method, is having insight into where that anxiety is coming from. So as I'm mapping out my own anxiety, I was able to see that decisions that I needed to make kept coming up, right? If you see in my thought map, the DRPLA, that's the rare neurodegenerative condition that my children had. And it actually, fighting that disorder for 15 years with my children, gave me this, very negative core belief that it doesn't matter how hard you work, you might not be successful, right? And I'm bringing that in to a current decision that didn't really have that much weight or power. But because of the history of decision making, and if you watch my videos, see my story, it is a lot about, during that time, I was fighting this neurodegenerative condition in my children, and I eventually lost them to death. My son died in 2016, and my daughter died in 2021. And I worked really hard to try to treat this disorder and take good care of them. And I failed, right? And these are the negative things that I say to myself, but I know that you have those negative things that you're saying to yourself that are contributing to your anxiety today. And sometimes if you don't take the time to try to have insight into where that anxiety is coming from, you don't know that. And so then you're just focusing on the here and now anxiety. Many people teach the way that you move through anxiety is you take an action. You move forward in an action. And there is some truth to that. But having insight into where it's coming from and taking an action gives you more confidence and power in that to move it down, right? So I have a choice opportunity for you in the description. And this will allow you to, it's just a worksheet that talks about anxiety is a strength. And you'll be listing your anxieties, rating them so that you can make some conscious decisions to bring them down to a manageable level. You know, if you can get your anxiety from a 0 to a 3, you have control. You are managing it. So many times people tell me, I can't control my anxiety. And I challenge that. You can control your anxiety. But what happens is you're trying to stop your anxiety. And oftentimes when you're trying to stop something, it just increases, right? Just like if someone says, I don't want you to see any red in the room, all of a sudden you're noticing the red in the room. It's because it brings it to consciousness. So when you say, don't be anxious, you actually bring it up to the surface. So if you were at a 7 or 8 and you're trying to say, don't be anxious, don't be anxious, don't be anxious, you're probably bringing that up to an 8 or 9. Instead of, what can I do to bring it down to a 4 or 5? So I have 3 things for you as you try to use your anxiety as a strength. Stop the all or nothing thinking, right? And I just said when you say stop, it brings it to the surface. But I want you to bring it to the surface so that you can have insight into it. Okay? We often do this. We have this all or nothing thinking. So we're struggling with anxiety and we're trying really, really hard not to have anxiety. Anxiety is a normal emotion. It is what keeps us successful and productive. And in extreme cases, it is your fight or flight. It is your response to keep you alive. You can't stop your body from doing what it will naturally do. So if we can bring that all or nothing thinking to the surface and say, anxiety is a continuum, and I am going to work on bringing my anxiety down to a manageable level, which includes 2 things. So the all or nothing thinking, we're going to minimize that. We're going to figure out by going backwards why we're anxious. There's patterns in our life, and you can see that in my thought map. And it really came down to decisions for me go back to a spiritual conflict. And in that spiritual conflict, there's a right and a wrong that is going to be either rewarded or punished. And this is kind of what I was taught, what I believed about my spiritual relationship. And then it impedes or comes into current decisions. Like I have to make the right decision. And sometimes there's not a right or wrong decision. So we're going to bring that all or nothing thinking to the surface. That's number 1. And we're going to think of it as a continuum that we're going to bring down or manage. Number 2, we're going to work on the insight as to where the patterns are coming from. And then 3, then we're going to take action, right? So instead of just thinking, okay, I'm anxious about this, I'm just going to take action. Sometimes, if you're anxious in the middle of a decision that needs to be made right away, you do need to do that. You do need to just take action. But I challenge you to then kind of work through the insight of that, where it's coming from, where was that anxiety coming from, because that will help in your journey of bringing your anxiety on a consistent level to a lower, manageable, productive level. I'm Cristi Bundukamara. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner with over 20 years of clinical experience, but I teach based on my life story in that I have overcome depression and anxiety. I have navigated grief and trauma, and I teach how we can continue to work on our mentally strong journey. I talked about the mentally strong method a little bit in this video, and so I would love for you to take the time to watch at least one of my mentally strong method videos. They are a little longer, but it shows you how we can actually learn to think through our problems, organize them, and make choices in line with what we really want.